The morning light through the east-facing windows of Caldwell Park fell in long, pale columns across the entrance hall, catching the polished marble and the arrangement of hothouse flowers Mrs. Pinnock had placed on the console table at 7:30. It was a Tuesday in late April, the kind of morning that arrived with birdsong and the faint green smell of the park beyond the open windows, and the Mertons' carriage had been spotted on the drive at precisely the hour their card had indicated. Everett Ashmore, Duke of Caldwell, stood in the entrance hall with the ease of a man who occupied every room as though it had been built around him. He was 31, tall, fair-haired, with the particular confidence that came not from arrogance, but from a lifetime of being deferred to. He had dressed with his usual care, a dark blue morning coat, buff trousers, his cravat tied with the precision his valet had long since learned not to adjust, and he stood with one hand resting lightly on the back of the hall chair as Larch opened the door. "Lady Merton, Sir Thomas. What a pleasure." His voice carried the warmth of a man who understood that county relations were the mortar of a duke's position. "I must apologize. My wife is indisposed this morning and will not be receiving. But please, do come through. I have asked Mrs. Pinnock to have tea brought to the morning room." He said it smoothly. He said it with the particular certainty of a man who had said similar things before, not often enough to constitute a pattern, but often enough that the words required no thought. She finds society fatiguing. She prefers the quiet of the house. She's not feeling quite herself today. Each time he had believed it. Each time it had been easier than the alternative, which was to share the room, the conversation, the decisions about which invitations to accept and which neighbors to cultivate. He was not a cruel man. He was an efficient one, and efficiency, left unexamined, had hardened into something he had not named. Lady Merton was a woman of perhaps 50, dressed in a morning gown of deep green silk, with a cream spencer and a bonnet she was already removing as she stepped into the hall. She had sharp gray eyes and the particular stillness of a woman who listened before she spoke. Sir Thomas followed, broad, genial, ruddy from the ride, along with their daughter Miss Merton and the Reverend Mr. Cotham, who served as the Mertons' perpetual companion on social calls and whose chief talent was agreeable silence. "How kind," Lady Merton said, and her eyes moved, not to the Duke, not to Larch, not to the flowers on the console table, but past all of them to the staircase. Nora Ashmore stood on the third step from the bottom. She was dressed to receive. Her gown was pale blue muslin with a high empire waist and delicate white embroidery at the bodice, her hair arranged with the quiet precision that her maid Dunn understood without instruction. She wore a single strand of pearls, her mother's, and her hands were folded in front of her with the composure of a woman who had been standing there long enough to hear every word. She had come down at 9:45, as she always did when guests were expected. She had heard the carriage on the gravel. She had been descending the staircase when her husband's voice reached her from the hall below, and she had stopped, not because she was uncertain, but because the words required a moment of absolute clarity before she chose what to do with them. "She is not receiving today." She had heard it. She had understood it, not as cruelty, because it was not cruel. It was worse than cruelty. It was habit. The quiet, practiced habit of a man who had decided, without consulting her, without examining the decision, that his life operated more smoothly without her in the room. The visitor's eyes were on her now. Sir Thomas had followed his wife's gaze and gone slightly pink. Miss Merton's lips had parted. The Reverend Mr. Cotham was studying the ceiling with the intensity of a man who wished to be elsewhere. And Lady Merton was watching Nora's face with the particular attention of a woman who recognized composure because she had spent a lifetime practicing it. The Duke had not yet turned around. "Shall we go through?" he said, gesturing toward the corridor. "Your Grace," Lady Merton said, and her voice was perfectly level, "I believe the Duchess is here after all." Everett turned. The moment lasted perhaps 3 seconds. His wife stood on the staircase in her pale blue muslin, her pearls, her folded hands, and she looked at him with an expression that contained no anger, no accusation, no hurt, only clarity. The kind of clarity that a man could not argue with, because it was not an argument. It was simply the truth, standing on the third step, dressed to receive guests he had dismissed on her behalf. "Good morning, Lady Merton," Nora said, and she descended the remaining steps with the unhurried grace of a woman entering her own entrance hall, which it was. "Sir Thomas, Miss Merton, Mr. Cotham. How very kind of you to call. Shall we go through to the morning room? Mrs. Pinnock has arranged the most beautiful primroses from the garden. I must show you before they close for the afternoon." She passed her husband as though he were a piece of furniture. Not pointedly, there was nothing sharp in it, nothing designed to wound. She simply moved through the hall with the ease of a woman who belonged there, and the guests followed her because she was the one who had invited them, and she was the one who was receiving them, and she was the one whose composure made it possible for everyone to pretend that what had just happened had not happened at all. Everett stood in his own entrance hall and watched his wife lead his guests away. Mr. Fenn, his secretary, was standing near the study door with a sheaf of correspondence. He had witnessed the entire exchange. He said nothing. He did not need to. His face, carefully neutral, said everything that good breeding prevented his mouth from saying. The morning room at Caldwell Park faced south and east, and at this hour the light came through the tall windows in generous warm sheets that touched the primroses on the side table, and the pale yellow silk of the curtains and the polished surface of the tea table where Mrs. Pinnock had laid out the best Sèvres service. Nora sat in the chair nearest the window, her chair, the one she always occupied when they received, though they had not received together in some weeks now, and she poured the tea with steady hands. "What a beautiful room," Lady Merton said, accepting her cup. "I had heard Caldwell Park was handsome, but this is exceptional. The proportions are very fine." "My husband's grandmother oversaw the decoration of this wing," Nora said. "I have not altered it. I think she understood the light better than anyone could now." "You have a feeling for rooms, Your Grace. One can tell by the flowers." "I have a feeling for primroses. Everything else is Mrs. Pinnock's doing, and she would not thank me for taking credit." Lady Merton smiled. It was the smile of a woman who was making a decision, and the decision was that she liked the Duchess of Caldwell very much. Sir Thomas, who had the social instincts of a well-meaning retriever, launched into an account of the new drainage works on the Merton estate, and Nora listened with the attentive interest of a woman who understood that drainage works were the foundation upon which county friendships were built. She asked the right questions about the clay subsoil near the lower meadows, about the cost of the new tiles from Bridgewater, and Sir Thomas expanded with the warmth of a man who had found someone willing to hear about drainage for more than 45 seconds. The Duke appeared in the doorway. He had waited, how long? 5 minutes? 7? And in that interval, his understanding of the morning had shifted in ways he could not yet articulate. He had stood in the entrance hall hearing the sound of his wife's voice from the morning room, the laughter, the particular cadence of conversation that meant things were going well, and he had felt something he could not immediately identify. It was not jealousy. It was not anger. It was the slow, uncomfortable recognition that the room operated perfectly well, perhaps better, without him in it. He entered and sat in the chair nearest the door. It was not his usual chair. His usual chair was beside the fireplace at the center of the room, and his wife was sitting in it. No, that was not right. His wife was sitting in her own chair by the window, where she had always sat. He had simply never noticed that the room arranged itself around her rather than around him. "Ah, Caldwell," Sir Thomas said. "Your wife has been asking about the new drainage tiles. Remarkable woman. Most people's eyes glaze over by the second sentence." "Yes," the Duke said. "She is remarkable." He said it quietly. Nora did not look at him. She was asking Miss Merton about the assembly rooms at Bridgewater and whether the new subscription library had received the latest volumes from London. And Miss Merton, who was 19 and had been frightened of calling on a duchess, was answering with the animated ease of a young woman who had been made to feel that her opinions mattered. This was what his wife did. This was what she had always done when he had allowed her to do it. She made rooms work. She drew people out. She remembered that Sir Thomas cared about drainage and that Miss Merton cared about novels and that the Reverend Mr. Cotham had a quiet passion for botany which could be activated by a single question about the primroses. She did it without performance, without effort, with the natural social intelligence of a woman who had been raised by a father who was a baronet of modest means and great warmth, and who had taught his daughter that every person who entered your home deserved the gift of your attention. And Everett had been managing her out of rooms for months. He sat in the wrong chair and drank his tea and watched his wife be extraordinary in the way she had always been extraordinary, and the uncomfortable feeling in his chest refined itself into something sharper, something with a name. Shame. It was shame. Lady Merton was watching him. He became aware of it gradually, her gray eyes moving between him and Nora with the quiet intelligence of a woman who had been navigating the county's social landscape for 30 years and who understood, with perfect precision, what she was seeing. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The visit lasted an hour. It was, by any measure, a success, the kind of county morning call that established connections, opened doors, laid the groundwork for the invitations and alliances, and quiet mutual supports that constituted the life of a great estate among its neighbors. Sir Thomas departed with the conviction that the Duchess understood drainage. Miss Merton departed with 2 book recommendations and an invitation to tea the following week. The Reverend Mr. Cotham departed with a cutting of the primrose variety he had admired, wrapped in damp muslin by Mrs. Pinnock. Lady Merton departed last. She took Nora's hand at the door and held it for a moment longer than convention required. "You must come to us at Merton Hall," she said. "Thursday, if you are free. I have been wanting a proper conversation for some time, and I think we shall have a great deal to discuss." "I should like that very much, Lady Merton." Cordelia. "I think we have moved past Lady Merton, do you not?" Nora smiled, the first unguarded smile of the morning. Cordelia then. "And I am Nora." "I know you are," Lady Merton said, and something in the way she said it, quiet, certain, final, contained an understanding that went beyond introductions. She glanced once at the Duke, who was standing behind his wife in the hall, and her expression was not unkind. It was simply the expression of a woman who saw things clearly and who had decided, with the efficiency that the Duke himself would have recognized, exactly where her allegiance lay. The carriage pulled away. The door closed. The entrance hall was empty except for Nora and Everett and the columns of morning light and the flowers on the console table. Nora stood with her back to her husband. She was looking at the door through which the Mertons had departed, and her composure, which had carried her through the entire morning without a single crack, was still perfectly intact. She did not turn around. "Nora," the Duke said. She was quiet for a moment, then she turned, and she looked at him with the same clarity she had shown on the staircase. No anger, no accusation, no wounded pride. Just the truth. "You do not get to decide when I exist," she said. One sentence. 6 words that contained the entire architecture of what he had done. The quiet management, the decisions made on her behalf, the social engagements attended alone, the visitors received without her, the slow, careful erasure of her presence from the life of the estate, carried out not with malice, but with the thoughtless efficiency of a man who had never questioned his right to arrange a room to suit himself. She did not wait for his response. She walked past him and up the staircase, her hand trailing along the banister, and the pale blue muslin of her gown caught the light as she ascended. And Everett stood in the entrance hall of his own estate, and understood that he had no answer for her because there was no answer. She was right. She had been right on the staircase, and she had been right in the morning room, and she had been right at the door, and she was right now, walking away from him with the composure that he had mistaken for passivity, and which was, in fact, the most formidable thing about her. The flowers on the console table, the hothouse arrangement that Mrs. Pinnock had placed there at 7:30, the one that Nora had selected from the glass house the previous evening, sat in the silence she had left behind. He stared at them. He had not known she chose the flowers. He had assumed Mrs. Pinnock did it, the way he had assumed most things about the household were managed by the staff, rather than by the woman he had just told 5 strangers was indisposed. The petals were white and faintly yellow at the center, and they were trembling, though there was no draft. And after a moment, he realized they were trembling, because his hand was resting on the console table, and his hand was not steady. Mr. Fenn appeared in the study doorway with the afternoon correspondence. He took one look at the Duke's face and withdrew without a word. He set the letters on the study desk, aligned them with the edge as was his habit, and closed the door behind him. In 15 years of service to the Ashmore family, Mr. Fenn had never once offered an opinion that had not been solicited. He did not intend to begin now, but he permitted himself, in the privacy of the corridor, a single exhaled breath that carried the weight of considerable professional relief. Someone, at last, had said the thing that needed saying. The days that followed were not dramatic. There was no confrontation, no locked doors, no tearful scene in the bedchamber. Nora simply continued to exist, visibly, unapologetically, in every room of Caldwell Park. And the Duke, for the first time in their marriage, had to reckon with the woman he had married rather than the idea of her he had constructed. She received callers. She received them in the morning room at the proper hour, dressed with the quiet elegance that had always been hers, and she did not ask his permission or inform him in advance. The first time it happened, Mrs. Cotham and her daughter arriving unannounced on a Thursday afternoon, Everett learned of it from Larch, who mentioned it in passing while delivering a letter from the House of Lords. "The Duchess is receiving in the morning room, Your Grace. Shall I bring your tea there?" "No," the Duke said. "No, she is receiving." "Yes, Your Grace." He sat in his study and listened to the sound of conversation from across the corridor and felt the architecture of his marriage shifting beneath him, like a house settling onto new foundations. Mrs. Pinnock brought his tea at 3:30, as she always did, and she set it on the desk beside the correspondence with the particular care of a woman who had served this household for 11 years and who had opinions she would never voice. But she paused at the door, just for a moment, just long enough for the Duke to notice, and said, "The Duchess has ordered supper for 2 this evening, Your Grace, in the dining room. Shall I set a third place, or will you be taking yours in the study?" It was, on its surface, a perfectly ordinary household question. It was also, and Everett understood this with a clarity that surprised him, the first time in months that Mrs. Pinnock had not simply assumed his preferences. She was asking because the Duchess had reclaimed the dining room, and the dining room was no longer his to assume. "The dining room," he said. "2 places will be sufficient." "Very good, Your Grace." She closed the door. He sat with his tea cooling beside untouched letters and thought about the word sufficient and how it had come to describe his place in his own household, and how, if he was truthful with himself, and the morning's events had made anything less than truthfulness feel dangerous, it was precisely the place he had earned. She went to Merton Hall on Thursday, as Lady Merton had invited her. She went in the carriage, his carriage, the Caldwell crest on the door, and she did not tell him she was going because she did not need to tell him. She was not being defiant. She was simply being his wife, in the fullest sense of the word, and it was only because he had spent months reducing that role to something smaller and quieter that her resumption of it felt like an act of revolution. Lady Merton, Cordelia, proved to be exactly the kind of friend that Nora had not known she needed. She was sharp and warm and entirely without pretension, a woman who had managed a large estate and a genial husband and 4 children and the complex social machinery of the county with an intelligence that she wore lightly, like a well-cut Spencer. She understood, without Nora ever having to explain it, what had been happening at Caldwell Park. "Men of his rank often do it," Cordelia said, pouring tea in the drawing room at Merton Hall. "They do not mean to diminish. They simply find it easier to operate alone, and they mistake efficiency for consideration. My Thomas did it for the first 3 years of our marriage. He stopped when I invited the Bishop of Bath and Wells to dinner without telling him." Nora laughed. It was the first full laugh she had permitted herself in weeks, and the sound of it surprised her. "What happened?" "The bishop talked about drainage for 2 hours. Thomas was furious. Then he was grateful because the bishop approved the new church roof. After that, he understood that I was useful, and after a further year, he understood that usefulness was not why he married me. Men are slow, Nora. They get there. The good ones get there. At Caldwell Park, the Duke was getting there. It was not a single moment of revelation, but a series of small recognitions, each one landing with the quiet precision of a stone dropped into still water. He noticed that Mrs. Pinnock came to Nora for the household decisions, the menus, the linen rotation, the management of the kitchen garden, and had been coming to her all along, even during the months when he had imagined himself at the center of the estate's operations. He noticed that Larch deferred to her on matters of the tenants' welfare, the Hayward family's leaking roof, old Mrs. Prentice's need for firewood, and that she handled these things with a competence that suggested long practice rather than recent ambition. He noticed that the correspondence on her writing desk was not, as he had vaguely assumed, personal letters and invitations, but a detailed accounting of the household expenses, cross-referenced with the steward's quarterly reports, annotated in her precise hand. She had been running his house. She had been running it competently, quietly, without recognition, and he had been standing in front of her telling visitors she was indisposed. The evening he found the household accounts was the evening he went to her sitting room. She was reading by candlelight, 2 tall beeswax candles in silver holders, the curtains drawn against the April dusk, and she looked up when he entered with an expression that was neither welcoming nor unwelcoming. It was simply attentive, the expression of a woman waiting to see what a man would do with the space she had given him. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Yes," she said. "You do." He had expected, what? That she would soften, that the admission would be enough, that the word apology would open a door through which he could walk back to the comfortable arrangement he had maintained. But Nora did not soften, and the door did not open, because she understood something that he was only beginning to grasp, that an apology was a beginning, not an end, that the word meant nothing without the alteration that followed it. "I am not certain how when I began to..." He stopped. He was a man who spoke in the House of Lords with fluency and force, who could dismantle an argument with 3 sentences, who had never in his adult life been unable to finish a thought. But this was not the House of Lords. This was his wife's sitting room, and the argument he was trying to dismantle was himself. "You did not begin," Nora said. She set her book aside, a volume of Cowper's poems, the page marked with a ribbon. "That is what made it so difficult to address. There was no beginning. There was simply a gradual assumption that my presence was optional. You did not decide it. You drifted into it. And because it was never a decision, you never had to defend it. And because you never defended it, you never examined it." He stood in the doorway and heard his marriage described with a precision that left him nowhere to stand. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "I need you to stop answering for me," she said. "I need you to let me answer for myself, not because I require your permission, but because you have been withholding it without knowing you were withholding it, and that must stop. It will stop. Words are easy, Everett. Then watch." She looked at him for a long moment. The candlelight was warm on her face, on the pale blue ribbon in her hair, on the strand of pearls she had not yet removed for the evening. She did not smile. She did not reach for him. But something in her expression shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the willingness to allow him the space to earn it. Which was, he understood, more than he deserved, and exactly what she had always given him, the precise amount of grace the situation required, neither more nor less. He left her sitting room and closed the door softly behind him. The weeks that followed were the rebuilding. It was slow work, the kind of work that could not be rushed or performed or declared complete because the damage had been slow and the repair had to match it. The Duke began with the awkwardness of a man learning a skill he should have possessed from the start, to include his wife. He included her in the morning correspondence, sitting beside her at the breakfast table, reading aloud from the letters that required household decisions, asking her opinion on the matters that touched the estate's tenants and neighbors. He included her in the social calendar, not by informing her of engagements he had accepted, but by bringing her the invitations and asking which ones she wished to attend. He included her in the visits, standing beside her when callers arrived, introducing her before himself, watching as she did what she had always done, which was to make every person in the room feel that they had been received. It was not comfortable. It required him to cede ground he had held without realizing he held it, to share decisions he had made without realizing he was making them alone. But Nora made it bearable in the way she made everything bearable, with competence, with patience, with the quiet expectation that he would meet the standard she set, rather than the one he had established for himself. The Mertons came to dinner in May. It was the first formal dinner the Duke and Duchess had hosted together in 4 months, and Nora oversaw every detail, the menu, the seating, the flowers, the candles in their silver branches, casting warm light across the mahogany table. She seated Lady Merton beside the Duke, which was either an act of trust or a test, and Everett understood that it was both. "Your wife tells me you have been attending more closely to the tenants' cottages," Lady Merton said over the fish course, her gray eyes bright with the amusement of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. My wife has been attending to them for longer than I knew, the Duke said. I am merely learning to keep pace. Cordelia looked at Nora across the table. Nora looked back. Something passed between them. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but the quiet acknowledgement of two women who understood that the real work of a marriage happened in precisely these moments, when a man said something true without being prompted, without an audience that mattered, simply because the truth had become easier than the alternative. After dinner, when the party had moved to the drawing room and Sir Thomas was explaining the success of the Bridgewater drainage tiles to Mr. Fenn, who bore it with the patience of a man who had no choice, the Duke found himself standing beside his wife near the window. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seating Cordelia beside me. I believe she is the most terrifying woman in the county, and I believe you did it deliberately." Nora smiled. "She is the most perceptive woman in the county, which is more dangerous. And yes, I did it deliberately." "Why?" "Because you needed to be seen clearly by someone whose opinion you could not manage, and because she already sees you clearly, which means the worst of it is over." He looked at his wife in the candlelight of their drawing room, at the pearls and the pale silk of her evening gown, and the composure that he had once mistaken for passivity and now understood was the scaffolding that held their entire life in place, and he felt something that he had not felt before. Not love, because he had loved her in his fashion from the start, but recognition. The full, unmediated recognition of who she was, separate from who he had needed her to be. "I was wrong," he said. "You were. I will not be wrong about this again." "No," she said. "I do not think you will." She reached out and straightened his cravat. A small gesture, domestic, unremarkable, the kind of thing a wife did without thinking. But she had not touched him voluntarily in weeks, and the contact, her fingers against his collar, brief and precise, said more than any declaration could have. He caught her hand before she withdrew it, and he held it, and she let him, and they stood like that for a moment while Sir Thomas talked about drainage tiles, and Cordelia watched them from across the room with an expression that was, for the first time that evening, entirely soft. The seasons turned. The summer brought long evenings in the garden where Nora had established a cutting garden for the house, and the Duke learned the names of the flowers because she knew them, and because knowing what she knew had become important to him. He attended the House of Lords for the autumn session and returned to find that his wife had managed the harvest, negotiated with the grain merchant, resolved a boundary dispute with the neighboring estate, and befriended every family within 5 miles of Caldwell Park. "You have been busy," he said, standing in the entrance hall with his traveling case, looking at a wife who was more formidable than he had left. "I have been visible," she corrected, and kissed his cheek, and sent Larch for his tea. The winter brought the news that Nora was with child. She told him at breakfast, quietly, over eggs and toast, and he set down his cup with a steadiness that cost him considerable effort. "Are you pleased?" she asked. "I am. Nora, I am." He stopped. He took her hand across the breakfast table, the eggs going cold, the toast forgotten, and he said, "I am grateful. For you. For all of it. I have not said it enough." "You have not said it at all," she said, but she was smiling, and the smile reached her eyes, and the morning light through the breakfast room windows was warm on her face. Their son was born the following spring in the bedroom overlooking the park, with Mrs. Pinnock stationed in the corridor and Larch keeping the household running with his usual silent competence, and the Duke pacing the library below, until Cordelia Merton, who had arrived that morning and refused to leave, told him to sit down before he wore a groove in the floorboards. They named him Thomas. Sir Thomas Merton, when told, went red to the ears and had to excuse himself to the garden, where he was found 20 minutes later examining the drainage near the ornamental lake and claiming the wind had made his eyes water. Cordelia held the baby on the day of the christening and said, "He has your eyes, Nora, and your composure. He has not cried once." "He is 7 days old," Nora said. "Give him time. If he is anything like his mother, he will save his tears for when they are useful, and by then everyone in the room will already know they are wrong." The entrance hall at Caldwell Park had not changed. The marble was the same, the console table stood in the same place, the light fell through the east-facing windows in the same long, pale columns. But the house had changed, not in its architecture, but in its atmosphere, in the way it breathed, in the particular quality of warmth that filled its rooms when a home was inhabited by two people rather than managed by one. On a Tuesday in late April, almost exactly a year after the morning the Mertons had first called, Nora descended the staircase with Thomas in her arms. She was dressed to receive, as she always was when guests were expected, and the Duke was standing in the entrance hall below. He looked up at her. "The Mertons' carriage is on the drive," he said. And then, with the quiet precision of a man who had learned something that he would never unlearn, "Shall we receive them together?" She descended the staircase and stood beside him, their son between them, and when Larch opened the door, she watched her husband greet their guests with a warmth that included her in every word, and she thought, not for the first time, but with a clarity that felt new, that the real measure of a man was not whether he was wrong, but whether he allowed himself to know it. The door stood open. The morning light came through, and the Duchess of Caldwell received her guests. They arrive here, like a guest finally properly received, whenever they are ready.